The neon sign outside Mel's diner sputtered like a tired heartbeat, its deep red glow spilling across an almost deserted parking lot. A November wind, sharp and restless, swept through the cracks in the building's faded siding, making the old diner groan in protest. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed with a low, electric monotone, illuminating cracked vinyl booths and a coffee-stained counter that had soaked up decades of whispered conversations and lonely midnight meals. Tiana Martinez stood at one of the corner tables, wiping the surface for the third time in as many minutes. At 23, she had mastered the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that in her world, survival meant never standing still. Her black hair was pulled back into a messy bun, loose strands framing her pale, tired face. The faded pink uniform, embroidered with Mel's above the pocket, hung loosely from her small frame, an unintentional reminder of skipped meals and long shifts. The graveyard shift was brutal, but 50 cents more an hour was 50 cents closer to keeping her and her younger sister from falling behind on rent. From the kitchen window, Jimmy, the night cook, barked, "Order up!" His face, flushed from decades of leaning over hot grills, looked more irritable than usual tonight. Tiana moved quickly, expecting greasy burgers and soggy fries, but instead, Jimmy held up 2 charred sandwiches. The bread was blackened at the edges, curling inward, with smoke still rising in lazy spirals. "Grill's acting up again," he muttered. "Customer at table 4's not gonna want these." "I'll make him fresh ones," Tiana offered, reaching for the ruined plates. "Nah, he's gone." "Couldn't wait," Jimmy replied with a shrug, scraping the grill with unnecessary force. "Just toss 'em. Can't serve burnt food to paying customers." But Tiana didn't throw them away. She wrapped them neatly in napkins, tucked them into a paper bag, and slid them under the counter. A silent ritual she had performed countless times. Carlos, the new dishwasher, emerged with a rack of clean plates, smirking. "There she goes again," he said to no one in particular. "Every night, taking burnt food like it's gold." His tone dripped with casual judgment, the kind of arrogance only 19-year-olds with nothing to lose could manage. Tiana ignored him, though her cheeks burned. She made her rounds, checking on the trucker drowning himself in coffee, the elderly woman picking at apple pie, and a man in a worn baseball cap who seemed content to nurse a single cup for hours. The man at the counter was unremarkable. Average build, average clothes, average presence. But under the brim of his cap, Marcus Langston was anything but average. For 3 weeks, he had come here during the graveyard shift, always in the same seat, always silent. To the staff, he was just another sleepless soul seeking caffeine and warmth. In truth, Marcus owned this diner, and 47 more across 3 states. At 52, Marcus had built his empire from the ground up, starting with a single failing restaurant bought with every cent he had. Success had been hard-won, but over the years, it had distanced him from the heartbeat of his own business. The people who worked the long hours for little pay. Rumors of high turnover, low morale, and poor conditions had reached his ears, and he wanted answers. Not from reports or spreadsheets, but from seeing it with his own eyes. 12 locations into his undercover visits, he'd seen the same discouraging patterns: cut corners, disengaged staff, apathetic managers. But Mel's was different. Mel's had Tiana. He noticed the way she worked. Not just wiping tables, but cleaning them until they shone. Not just refilling napkin dispensers, but arranging them with care. And then there was the food. Every night, around 2 a.m., she quietly gathered up whatever couldn't be served. Burnt sandwiches, overcooked eggs, fries gone limp under the heat lamp, and packed them as if each item mattered. She never touched money that wasn't hers, never took tips she hadn't earned. Yet she treated those cast-off meals like they were lifelines. Tonight, Marcus watched her slide the bag with the burnt sandwiches into her purse, along with some crackers and a cup of soup that had sat too long under the heat. "Heading out, Tiana?" Jimmy called. "Yeah, see you tomorrow night," she answered, pulling on a thin jacket that barely held back the bite of the cold. Marcus waited 3 minutes before leaving himself. He dropped a $5 bill on the counter, more than enough for the coffee, and stepped into the night. His modest sedan sat at the far end of the lot, chosen precisely because it would be forgotten the moment it was seen. Ahead, under the hard glow of the streetlights, Tiana walked with the kind of determination born from necessity, her small figure bracing against the November wind. Marcus followed at a distance, a quiet curiosity growing into something deeper, an unshakable sense that there was more to her story than burnt sandwiches. Tiana didn't walk like someone heading home to collapse into bed after a long shift. She moved with urgency, her steps sharp and deliberate, as if time itself was pressing against her back. The cold wind tugged at her thin jacket, but she clutched the paper bag to her chest as though it carried something far more precious than burnt sandwiches. From a discreet distance, Marcus trailed behind in his sedan, the low hum of the engine almost lost to the hiss of the wind. He told himself this was part of his job. Understanding his employees beyond the walls of his diners was the only way to truly address morale and loyalty. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the whole truth. Something about Tiana had captured his attention since the first night he saw her. She carried herself with a quiet dignity, the kind born of enduring more than her share of hardship, and she wore it like an invisible armor. The streets were nearly empty, their silence broken only by the rattle of loose street signs and the dry rustle of newspapers tumbling along the asphalt like modern tumbleweeds. Marcus's eyes stayed on her silhouette as she quickened her pace, her free hand gripping the lapels of her jacket. He had built his career on reading people, spotting patterns others missed, knowing when the pieces didn't fit. And Tiana Martinez was a puzzle that didn't fit. She worked like she owned the place, valued food others threw away, and vanished into the night with a purpose that made no sense for a young waitress scraping by. Tomorrow night, Marcus intended to sit in his usual seat, drink his usual coffee, and watch her repeat the same strange ritual. But tonight, he wasn't leaving it at observation. Tonight, he was going to find out where those sandwiches went, and maybe, just maybe, uncover the truth about who Tiana really was. The neighborhood shifted as she turned left onto 5th and Main, a transition Marcus recognized from countless cities. Not a slum, but far from thriving, where people worked hard just to keep the lights on. He parked a block back, killed the engine, and continued on foot. The air here was sharper, the wind threading between buildings like it was searching for something. Patience, he reminded himself. Whatever this was, Tiana had done it night after night with meticulous care. The first time he noticed her taking food, he had assumed it was simple necessity, a quiet theft born from hunger, the kind he had seen before and would have handled with discretion. The second night, when he saw her wrap the food with precision instead of carelessly stuffing it away, he wondered if she was feeding a friend or a stray animal. But on the third night, his perception shifted entirely. She examined the burnt sandwiches before packing them, checking them as though she understood the difference between food that merely looked bad and food that couldn't be eaten. That wasn't charity. That was survival. With every block, the buildings looked more worn, their edges softened by neglect. Tiana didn't hesitate at intersections, didn't glance at street signs. These streets were part of her, ingrained in muscle memory. Marcus followed her to a 3-story apartment building whose better days were decades past. The brickwork was chipped, windows boarded in places, and a rusted fire escape zigzagged upward like a skeleton clinging to the wall. Marcus stopped behind a dented white van, his breath forming faint clouds in the cold night. From here, he watched her climb the steps and slip inside. Moments later, a second-floor window glowed weakly through a thin curtain. Her silhouette passed in and out of view, deliberate and unhurried, until another shadow joined hers, taller, male, younger. They embraced briefly, the kind of embrace that carried both relief and exhaustion, before stepping apart. Marcus stayed in place, his pulse steady but his mind working quickly. He didn't yet know the full story, but he could feel it. Whatever was waiting behind that curtain was more than a personal habit. It was a truth, and it was going to change how he saw not just Tiana, but the world she lived in. From the shadows across the street, Marcus watched the dimly lit apartment window, piecing together fragments of the puzzle. A boyfriend, a roommate. The possibilities felt too simple, too ordinary, and something in his gut told him the truth was more complex. The cold air condensed with each steady breath he exhaled, but the hour didn't weigh on him. His watch read past 2 in the morning, yet his pulse was steady with anticipation. This wasn't fatigue. It was the quiet rush of discovery, the same instinct that had driven him to build an empire from nothing. 10 minutes passed before the room went dark. Marcus didn't move right away. He'd learned long ago that patience was often the difference between getting an answer and missing the truth entirely. 5 more minutes, and he finally turned, retracing his steps to the car. The mystery wasn't solved, but he knew one thing. Those burnt sandwiches weren't for her. Someone in that building depended on them. Tomorrow, he'd be ready with better tools and a sharper vantage point. Driving back to his warm suburban home, Marcus found his thoughts tangled in the image of that crumbling apartment building. He had passed hundreds like it over the years without a second glance, assuming he understood what life inside must be like. But now it felt personal. He kept seeing the way Tiana had wrapped the sandwiches as though they were something precious, the urgency in her stride, and that brief embrace framed in the second-floor window. Whatever was happening there mattered to her more than anything else, and he intended to find out why. The 4th night, he arrived early. His coffee went cold as he sat at the counter, mind turning over theories like a detective running through leads. The weight of the binoculars in his pocket felt almost symbolic, a promise that tonight he would stop guessing and start knowing. The routine unfolded exactly as before. Jimmy accidentally burned another batch of sandwiches. Carlos made his usual jab, and Tiana quietly wrapped the ruined food with that same careful touch. At 2:18 a.m., she left. This time, Marcus moved into position not behind the van but in the alley beside the building, where the fire escape ladder offered a better view. Up close, the building was worse than he'd imagined. The paint peeled in strips. The scent of mold clung to the cold night air, and each creak of the metal under his boots spoke of years without maintenance. This wasn't just low-income housing. This was where people lived when life had cornered them. The light in the second-floor window snapped on, and Marcus lifted the binoculars. The apartment was shockingly small, barely more than a box. No couch, no proper bed, just milk crates doubling as chairs, a makeshift table, and a sleeping bag rolled into a corner. Clothes hung from nails hammered into cracked plaster. But it wasn't the poverty that stole Marcus's breath. It was the center of the room. Books, hundreds of them. Towering stacks of heavy textbooks, medical journals spread open like treasure maps, handwritten notes taped to the walls. In the middle of it all sat a young man, hunched over a massive textbook, his thin fingers gripping the pages like lifelines. Even from here, Marcus could see the sharpness in his eyes, the focus that cut through exhaustion. Recognition hit him hard. The resemblance was there in the cheekbones, in the way the young man furrowed his brow while concentrating. This wasn't a stranger. This was Tiana's brother. She entered the frame a moment later, moving with a weariness she tried to hide. She called his name. Marcus thought he heard Deshawn, and set the paper bag on a milk crate. When she looked at him, the fatigue drained from her face, replaced by something powerful and unyielding. Love, fierce and protective. Deshawn said something that made her laugh. A real laugh, unguarded and warm. Nothing like the polite smile she wore at the diner. She unpacked the sandwiches with care, and he took one without hesitation, eating as though it wasn't just food. It was fuel. Marcus's chest tightened as the truth settled in. This wasn't a casual late-night snack. This was dinner. Maybe the only dinner. Tiana kicked off her shoes and rubbed her aching feet, but she never stopped talking to him. Her attention never wavered, her voice steady and encouraging. Marcus let his gaze drift to the books again. Titles like MCAT Prep Guide, Organic Chemistry, 8th edition, and Human Anatomy and Physiology. Diagrams of the human body, marked with precise notes, hung from the walls. In that instant, the entire picture came into focus. Deshaun wasn't just studying. He was preparing for medical school. And Tiana, at 23, was carrying the financial and emotional weight of making that dream possible. Marcus lowered the binoculars slowly, his fingers trembling. In all his years of running businesses, of managing people and reading their lives in brief bullet points on resumes, he had never encountered someone like her. She wasn't just working to survive. She was sacrificing her own future to build someone else's. The burnt sandwiches weren't scraps. They were sustenance, lifelines, part of a quiet, relentless act of love. They weren't just scraps of food. Those sandwiches were love, made tangible in the only currency Tiana could afford. Through the binoculars, Marcus saw her rise from the milk crate, smoothing the wrinkles from her faded uniform before slinging her purse over her shoulder. She leaned down, saying something to her brother that made him pause mid-sentence. In his textbook, his face softened with a kind of seriousness that didn't belong to someone so young. And then Tiana bent and kissed the crown of his head. The gesture was so tender, so achingly human, that Marcus felt like he was trespassing into something sacred. As she reached for the door, Deshaun called out again. Even from across the street, Marcus could read the concern on his face, his voice urging her to take care of herself, his hands motioning toward her tired posture. She brushed it off with a laugh, pointing at his books in a no-excuses motion, as if her own fatigue wasn't worth acknowledging. Then, the light went out. Marcus stood in the alley, staring at the now dark window. Behind those bricks were two young people constructing a future from burnt sandwiches, dog-eared textbooks, and relentless willpower. He didn't sleep. The image stayed with him, Tiana's weary frame, her brother's thin hands turning pages, the fragile warmth of that apartment fighting against the winter air. By dawn, he was in his home office, the skyline glowing gold beyond his picture window, but his thoughts were still in that dim second-floor room. By 7, he was at corporate headquarters. The building's polished marble floors and floor-to-ceiling glass felt like another world entirely from where Tiana lived. He went straight to HR. "I need the employee file for Tiana Martinez," he told Sarah Chin, the HR director, as she arrived with her coffee. She raised an eyebrow. Marcus almost never requested individual files unless there was a problem. "Is everything okay? Any complaints?" "No complaints," he said quickly. "Just background research for a possible promotion opportunity." Not a lie, exactly. Just a truth he wasn't ready to explain. 20 minutes later, Sarah returned with a thin manila folder. "Here you go. Not much to see. She's only been with us 8 months. Marcus opened it in private. Inside, the details were sparse but telling. Her application was handwritten in careful, deliberate strokes. Her last job, a coffee shop, closed 6 months before she applied. Education, high school graduate, 2019. Emergency contact, only one name. Deshaun Martinez, same address as the apartment Marcus had found. No parents, no extended family. Just a young woman and her younger brother against the world. Her work record was flawless. No absences, no tardies, no customer complaints. Performance reviews, though few, praised her reliability and her habit of going above and beyond. She'd never asked for a raise. Marcus leaned back, letting the pieces fall into place. He needed more. That afternoon, he drove to the 5th Street Diner, not undercover this time, but in the role of a regional manager on inspection. Jimmy was on the day shift, and Marcus noticed the grill seemed to work perfectly now. "Tell me about your night crew," Marcus asked casually, clipboard in hand. Jimmy shrugged. "Night crews. Solid. Tiana's the best we've got. Works harder than people who've been here a decade. Been here 8-9 months? Right after her mom died." Marcus froze mid-note. "Her mother died? Yeah. Real sad. Cancer, I think. She dropped out of college to take care of her, then needed work fast when she passed. Had bills to pay." Marcus felt something in his chest twist. Admiration laced with anger at the kind of world that demanded such sacrifices from the young. "She was in college? Pre-nursing or something. Smart girl, but, sometimes life doesn't care about your plans." Marcus kept his voice neutral, but inside, the truth was crystallizing. She'd been training to heal people, and gave it up so her brother could do the same. Later, he found Eddie Kowalski, the day cook with a reputation for knowing everyone's story. "Tiana?" Eddie said. "Hell of a kid. Takes doubles when we're short. Never complains. I heard she's putting her little brother through med school." Marcus feigned surprise. "That's admirable." "Admirable doesn't cut it. She works 60 to 70 hours a week. Hunts down used textbooks at colleges hours away. Sold her car to pay for some test prep course. Walks to work now. Rain, snow, doesn't matter. Shows up soaked in winter, still smiles at customers. You fire her, you'll have to fire me too." Marcus promised her job was safe, but the conversation stayed with him. Driving home past manicured lawns and warm-lit windows, he couldn't shake the thought of her walking through the cold night, feet soaked, carrying those burnt sandwiches. She'd traded her own dream of becoming a nurse so her brother could wear the white coat someday. She was enduring the grind of minimum wage work not just to survive, but to lift someone else up. In a world where people fought for shortcuts, Tiana Martinez was quietly building a miracle the hard way. One long shift, one burnt sandwich, one sacrifice at a time. Until that night, Marcus had been blind to it all. Blind to the sacrifices, the quiet acts of devotion that never made headlines, the unseen battles fought in the shadows. For 3 more nights, he watched her, watched the way Tiana performed her ritual with unwavering precision, slipping burnt sandwiches into her bag as if they were priceless artifacts. He followed her in silence, seeing her disappear into the cold darkness, always ending at that tiny apartment where the lights burned late into the night. 3 nights of knowing he held the power to change her life forever, and 3 nights of wrestling with the same question. How could he help her without stripping away her dignity? The answer came unexpectedly on a Tuesday during the slowest shift of the week. The diner was nearly empty, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows on scuffed linoleum. Even the usual truckers had found somewhere else to go. It felt less like a restaurant and more like an abandoned stage set. Marcus sat at his usual stool, coffee cooling untouched, but tonight his mind was set. At 2:03 a.m., Jimmy called out, "Order up, but these are burnt to hell. Trash 'em." He said it with the same casual dismissal as always, and Marcus's eyes followed Tiana as she approached the window. She examined the charred sandwiches carefully, wrapping them in napkins with a tenderness that didn't belong to food destined for the trash. But before she could slip them into her purse, Marcus stood. "Excuse me," he said softly. She froze, the paper bag half hidden behind her back. Fear flashed in her eyes, the reflex of someone caught doing something they couldn't afford to explain. She began, but her voice faltered. "It's okay," Marcus said, hands raised in peace. "I'm not here to get you in trouble. I just want to talk." Jimmy had disappeared into the back, likely for a smoke, and Carlos was in his own world, headphones on, scrubbing dishes. For the first time, Marcus and Tiana were alone. "You don't understand," she whispered, holding the bag like a shield. "I don't take anything we can sell, just food that would be thrown away. I would never steal—" "I know you're not stealing," Marcus interrupted gently. "I know exactly what you're doing with that food." Confusion flickered in her expression. "What do you mean?" "I know about your brother," Marcus said quietly. The apartment on Elm Street, the medical textbooks, the sacrifices you're making so he can become a doctor. The bag slipped from her hands, landing softly on the floor. She stared at him as if he'd spoken another language. How could you possibly know that? Because I've been watching you, Marcus admitted, the words heavy in his mouth. Trying to understand why someone would work as hard as you do for so little. And now I know. Fear gave way to suspicion, then anger. Are you some kind of stalker? Going to call the cops? Get me fired? No, Marcus said firmly. I'm here because what you're doing, it's the most extraordinary thing I've seen in 23 years of business. Her eyes narrowed. Business? What business? You're just a customer who… No, Marcus said. And then, the moment he'd been holding back for weeks. I'm not just a customer. My name is Marcus Langston, and I own this diner. I own all the Mel's diners. Silence thickened between them, broken only by the hum of the lights and the faint bass from Carlos's music. Tiana blinked at him, disbelief hardening her features. You're lying. He reached into his wallet and placed a business card on the counter. She picked it up with trembling fingers, reading the embossed letters. But you've been here for weeks. Always the same coffee, the same seat. I've been visiting different locations undercover, he explained, trying to understand why morale was so low. But this place is different. This place has you. Tiana sank onto a stool. Is this a test? Did I fail? You didn't fail anything, Marcus said, his voice rough with sincerity. You reminded me why I started this business. To make work matter, to take care of people who take care of others. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. You brought it back. He picked up the fallen paper bag and handed it to her. You're not in trouble. You're being thanked. By someone who should have said thank you long ago. Her eyes glistened. I still don't understand why you're telling me this. Marcus smiled. Because, Tiana Martinez, your life is about to change. 6 weeks later, the woman staring back from the break room mirror hardly recognized herself. The navy blazer on her shoulders felt foreign, but right. The dingy diner had been transformed. New paint, new equipment, a fresh energy. She wasn't a waitress anymore. Her new title, Regional Team Coordinator. 3 times the pay, benefits, and tuition coverage if she chose to finish her degree. Marcus had framed it as a promotion, citing her leadership and commitment. She knew it was also an act of kindness dressed in professional respect. A knock at the door. Sarah Chin, HR director and now a mentor. Ribbon cutting's about to start, she said with a smile. Tiana stepped outside to a small crowd. Her eyes found Deshaun in the back, in a crisp shirt and tie, his face fuller, his shoulders less burdened. The scholarship from a private educational foundation had changed everything. Tuition, housing, meals. She suspected the truth, but never asked. Marcus spoke at the podium, praising hard work and dedication, values that built his company. His eyes found hers, and the meaning in his smile was unmistakable. Later, Deshaun hugged her, whispering, Mom would be proud of you too. I just did what family does, she said, looking around the bustling, renovated diner. That night, after closing, she stood at the counter where Marcus had once sat, remembering cold walks with burnt sandwiches in hand. The grill worked perfectly now. The sandwiches were never burnt anymore, but she would never forget the nights when those imperfect meals had been lifelines. Some questions didn't need answers. She didn't have to confirm the scholarship's source. The truth was written in the way Marcus's eyes had grown misty when he spoke of her impact. Stepping into her new car, another quiet benefit. She looked back. The neon sign shone steady and bright, casting a warm glow into the night. Because sometimes, when you least expect it, someone sees you. And sometimes, being seen is the greatest gift of all.